Project Entrepreneur, which is a program sponsored by UBS, and we're in the midst of that podcast. You can check your podcast catchers of choice to look up Off the Sidelines, and we're having an entire season about investor education. And so today we're combining Generocity's impact effort, Technically's pursuit of better investing, and we're going to have a fun conversation. I'm joined by Austin, who's on the VC side, Alberto, the CEO of the Knight Foundation, an illustrious national foundation. Alberto, Austin, thanks so much for being here for this interesting conversation.
Really excited to be here and honored to be.
Likewise. Thank you.
I appreciate it. So, we'll have folks join us. I wonder, Austin, Alberto, maybe to start off, how strange a conversation do you view this? Do you, Austin, does philanthropy look a million miles away to you? Alberto, does venture capital look a million miles away to you? Is this familiar or bizarre? I'd love to know your own sense of what a strange request this conversation is.
Sure. Maybe for some venture capitalists that may be the case, but for me, not at all. This feels like a very natural conversation, and it's just mainly because of what drives you in this industry, and for me, it's always been around economic inclusion. Philanthropy, plenty of philanthropists doing a lot of the same thing. I mean, Alberto and his organization, I saw they just had an announcement yesterday around a Black innovation commitment in Miami, which is huge, and so it's a lot of the same work. So there's plenty of overlap.
I joined Knight Foundation 15 years ago, and one of the very first mini controversies internally that we had was when I said to the program staff that I no matter what they thought they joined, I did not think I had joined a charity. I see myself as a social investor in charity. There's nothing against charity. If it's your money, you put your hand in your pocket and you give it. And that's the end of the story. Your reward will come in heaven, and with any luck. But in what we're doing, we're taking a deal that John and Jack Knight made with the IRS 50, 60, 70 years ago, depending on the foundation, and we are making good on that deal. And the deal is we're going to take the money, the tax advantage money, that they left, in our case, a little over $2 billion, and we're going to do some good with it. And we cannot afford to think of ourselves as anything other than investors who are looking for impact. Like any investor, then we look for a return, and that return is an impact. If it's money, then we get in trouble with the IRS. So we want impact, and there are lots of, we can talk about it if you want, but there are lots of consequences to that, not least of which is it raises, for philanthropic grant making, it raises the importance of sustainability in a way that direct charity, that simple charity, not to say that it's bad again, but that if your goal is charitable, only charitable, then it doesn't matter that once the project was done, it ended, and that it only continues if you keep being charitable. If you're an investor, it really matters. And if you're an investor in non-for-profit news organizations who need to be independent, they must be sustainable, because if they're not self-sustainable, they cannot be independent.
Well said. So we're going to actually throw up a couple poll questions in this conversation. One from, this is an audience of nonprofit folks, though it'll end up being a podcast for an investor education folks. And we're going to do one from both the what do folks want to learn from an investor perspective, a private market, I should say, investor perspective, and what do we think philanthropy has to teach? And so we're throwing up the first one on what would this community want to learn from venture capital? Basically, what would impact leaders best want or most want to understand from a venture world? And we threw out a few examples that from our technically reporting, we frequently know investors identify, investing in teams before the idea is that it's the team at its core. at early stage investing, that it's about making many small bets to see what can work. That at other stages, it's about, big, higher risk, but higher reward opportunities, play for the home run. That there's a concept of failing fast, try, admit if it's not working, and get out of there quick. And then, of course, inevitably we have the, VC has nothing to teach anyone. So folks, drop in an answer there. We'll give you a minute to respond and process them as we keep our conversation going between Alberto and Austin. But something that I want to do here at the outset for each of you, and maybe I'll start with Alberto and philanthropy. I would love to hear your sense of what does your respective sector do really well that you do think others could learn from, and I will also follow up with what the heck do you think your sector, your tribe is not doing particularly well that you need help and learning from. So Alberto, for even if you take the social investor lens, but from the foundation world, are there those areas that you're proud of that you and your fellow foundation heads, you'd say we do this well and others should learn from us about this, as opposed to what are those areas that you'd want to get better at?
I think there's a lot to be said for the kind of investing that philanthropy does. It is, first of all, it is disinterested in a way that the private investor, that the for-profit investor is not. If what you're trying to do is a public good versus personal gain, I think we perform a terrific service when we offer risk capital for the public good in a disinterested way. That's just as a matter of principle, as a matter of social good. I think that's we really do that well. I think we also, because we're so much focused on the public good, we also tend to fall in love with our grantees. We tend to fall in love with our hope that they will somehow figure it out, and will often not do nearly as well as a private investor will at being data-based, at being hard-nosed, at being realistic about the likelihood of things. One of my favorite investments over time was a project that actually didn't work. It was a 3-year grant. In the middle of the grant, the grantee called up to say it was an effort to get volunteers used by organizations online. This is early on in internet, and they had plenty of volunteers, but the online organizations, the Red Crosses and United Ways and so forth that they were trying to get, didn't really know how to use them online. And so they really had a disconnect. And a year and a half into the grant, the guy called me up and he said, it's not going to work. I think one day it might work. It's not going to work now. And so we're going to give the mailing list to Good Inc. or Good Org or whatever it was. And I'm going to return the second half of the second year, and I'm not going to claim the third year of the grant. And I said, hooray. He understands. That's what we ought to do, more realistic thinking like that.
That's really interesting. Austin, I'm going to come to you and say a similar question, but arm you with this poll from this audience, that how they look at VC. The two top were actually quite spread across their interests, but this group interested in that idea of investing in teams before the idea, and pursuing the home runs. Just with that maybe background, maybe answer your version of the question I just put to Alberto. What do you think VC actually does do well that you do have you do have the teach, and what the heck are you guys lost in?
So what
I should say, I didn't flag your own news that you have a new fund this year. That's actually why you're here, and I've totally stumbled on the introduction. Can you tell that I didn't read either of your introductions? That's how good I am at this.
That's okay. I'll give the 20-second then. Austin Clements, managing partner of a fund called Slauson & Co. We're early stage venture fund based here in LA. I also run an organization called Pledge LA, which is an initiative between the Annenberg Foundation and Mayor Garcetti's office designed to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion across Los Angeles. I also managing director of Grid 110, which is a nonprofit that promotes new business ownership and accelerator programs in Los Angeles. So
secretly, I'm in my podcast interview mode and forgetting this is also a live event at the exact same time. So yeah, but go ahead.
That's all good. That's all good. I'll answer the question, which I was glad to see the poll results kind of going in the direction of where I was going to answer the question, which is the thing that venture is exceptionally good at is underwriting big ideas, right? Like we optimize for, or have a fairly efficient process for, if someone is executing against a particular strategy, adding fuel to that fire to accelerate that opportunity and very quickly reach a goal that would otherwise seem unattainable, particularly in the time frame given. I think it's a beautiful thing to watch. It's still messy, in terms of like, when you read the stories on all like the media publications about this startup raising a ton of money and stuff like that, you're like, wow, everybody's probably in there and everything's easy and everybody's confident and everybody knows this is going to work out. When you're on the inside, it feels scattered and it feels like, oh, this is all going to fall apart at any moment. But the reality is, even with that into consideration, investors are comfortable with that because they know that that's part of the process. And so I think that venture is really good. Is we'll put a little bit of capital. If something's working, we'll put more capital into it and then watch it scale. We also provide guidance all the way up. So that's the area where I think that VC stands out as being particularly strong. On the weak side, well, I guess on a personal one, I still feel like we're doing particularly poor at inclusion, right? Like it's still a very insular industry where insiders get the opportunities to take advantage of that process, which I just described, of bringing new ideas to the world. The part of that is like the venture industry is relatively homogenous, or pretty homogenous, and then as a reflection of that, the networks that get funded are just the same. I think it's some number, like the majority of VCs have gone to like one of 3 schools. So it's just all when you see that. Exactly. And so when you see that, and then not surprisingly, those are the 3 schools that are most represented on from founders that are venture backed as well. I think when you start adding, which is why I'm really excited that there are a lot of new funds that are popping up led by people that come from outside of that network. When you start adding those people, you get different perspectives and you get new money going behind new ideas from people that sit outside of those pockets. And we, as a fund at Slauson & Co., kind of pride ourselves on being that conduit between those communities and the traditional venture ecosystem, which could fund it much further than we could, larger funds and whatnot.
I think you do an amazing job at that, Austin. And I think just the very fact that you recognize the filter bubble impact of those decision making, of the asking the question, are we all in the room? And the answer is almost always no. And if the answer is no, then you have work to do. We have work to do in philanthropy, maybe a little bit less than what you're describing. We found it really useful at night, first in journalism, then in arts, then in communities, to do open-ended contests and say, with no rules, and saying, okay, we're interested in delivering news and information on digital platforms to geographically defined communities. Any ideas? We've got money. You've got ideas. I think we can do something here. And it started out as simply as that. But I wanted to say 2 things about philanthropy, about working in teams, which we don't do well, but when we do, we've had some spectacular successes, and patient capital. In teams, I think one of the best examples of working in team, and credit to Darren Walker from Ford Foundation and Miriam Nolan from the Community Foundation of Southeastern Michigan, who put this group together. We ended up buying the Detroit Institute of Arts in the bankruptcy and giving it back to the city effectively. That's a slight exaggeration, but only by a tiny bit. But it was driven by Darren and Miriam, and it was a spectacular success, not just in terms of preserving a cultural treasure, but in terms of beginning a snowball. If you've ever read Getting to Yes, You want to start making side agreements. This was a really big side agreement that then helped push the bigger agreements. And Detroit comes out of bankruptcy in a year and a half when nobody would have bet that could possibly have happened. It was a tremendous contribution, and kudos to the leaders in that one. And patient capital, one of the things I'm most proudest of is an insight 15 years ago. Miami's the distinguishing characteristic is diversity. 3/4 of Miamians were born someplace else. Half were born in another country. We've got a natural diversity. And so if you're building community, and we do, you've got to find ways to unite it. And I thought, well, one of the things we can do is art. We had a terrific book fair. We had lots of art collections. We have Latin music. It was all kinds of reasons. We decide on art and decide that we're going to make art general in Miami. It's borrowing from a James Joyce phrase of snow was general all over Ireland. And that's exactly what I wanted to have. Art was general all over Miami. We started, and there were some people laughing. There were some letters in the paper, I remember, back in the day when there was this thing called the newspaper that I loved. And the woman said, who are these people and what town do they live in? Miami is not an art center. So you've got to have patience, and 15 years and about $170 million later, which for us is a lot of money. This is a town that thinks of itself, acts as if it is in fact an arts and culture kind of capital. It is in the center. It is using its position in the center of North and South as the main meeting place between South and North America. Art Basel decided to place its biggest fair in the world, biggest art fair in the world here in Miami, and we've ended up building an opera house, 2 brand new museums by Pritzker Prize winning architects, a couple of concert halls, all in the space of what other communities would take decades to do. It is phenomenal in a relatively short period of time. It is still patient capital because there was nobody who was going to say, oh yeah, that's a really good investment. Miami as a cultural capital. Miami as finance between North and South. Miami for beaches, great. But cultural capital, I don't think so. And I think we've done it. And I think we've got the reviews and the results to prove it.
And a theme running between, Alberto, what you just shared and Austin's earlier point are, I mean, at both ends, whether it's for charitable means, social investment means, pure market returns, they all in some sense have a degree of efficiency to it. It's we have finite resources. How do we reach our gains most effectively? Whatever that gain might be, charitable, social, financial, they're all essentially, I presume, both of you spend a lot of time saying, how do I use what dollars I have to reach my goals a bit more effectively? I don't know if you know this, but 2020 is a pretty disruptive year. Not sure if you guys are paying attention. And I wonder how much that adapts what you guys do. This is purely just new input? What we do remains the same? Or is there a radical rethink that comes out of a year this disruptive? And how that might be different
on this.
Your vantage points. Yeah.
Sure. So I think I'll break it into 2 phases. COVID hits, market crashes. First, call it few weeks when everybody was on lockdown. I think every VC was in triage mode, basically taking inventory of their portfolio companies, saying, how are you doing on cash? This might last a long time. Let's see. And people were injecting and infusing cash into portfolio companies to make sure that they could kind of ride this out. And I think as things have settled in, and people started to take a longer term view of really what are the implications of this. There's not a single industry that hasn't been turned completely upside down, and you're rethinking everything that you held true like as fundamental to this is how this business runs, all that gets thrown out the window and you have to rethink everything from the ground up. And so when that happens, that is when VCs get most excited, because that means that there's an opportunity to create like a long-term change. We're talking about, you know, again, we're good with big ideas. We're good with things that create like sort of human behavior shifts and generational shifts. And so we're thinking along what are the implications of this particular thing that's going on. Sorry, there's a siren in the background. I hope you can't hear. But what are the implications of this taking place now, and how can we and how can we take advantage? So in every industry, you're listening to ideas sort of with the lens of like, all right, now in this COVID world, how does this work? If I hear a pitch that was the same pitch as what I would have heard pre-COVID, then it's like you're missing the mark. I know that this industry has been changed. So like, what are the changes, and how do you position yourself to succeed? And who can quickly position themselves to do a land grab in whatever given industry they're going after, to become a category leader by rethinking how the industry itself works. So it's a lot of opportunity.
I think that's great. And we actually, when we first shut the office and started working, obviously remotely in early March, we first of all did, because we have a commitment to 26 communities around the United States. We made emergency relief contributions, usually through United Way or the local community foundation, and that was $11 or $12 million right up front, just to say, okay, let's everybody calm down. Let's start looking at this thing. Then we went through a complete portfolio review and basically categorized our existing grants into may not make it, probably okay, and really interesting. And the really interesting ones were the ones that we thought had the imagination to come out of this saying, a crisis, troubled waters. Let's see how we can help ourselves here. And this is a moment of not just of opportunity, but then for institutions we support a moment of permission. Imagine the director of a museum who wants to be a very serious person and wants to be perceived as a very serious person who will teach you things, and so all of a sudden having with his cell phone walking through the museum chatting about why he loves this painting and that one was painted by that rascal, and all of a sudden, before you know it, this shaky video thing is allowing him to really teach you and engage you in the art, and to give you insight into the thing and give you a connection to the art that you simply didn't have before. And before we would have said, what is he doing? Now we have this moment of permission where if it's shaky, it's okay. If it's homemade, it's sort of like the beginning of Skype when everybody said, oh, it's awful. Oh, isn't it fantastic? Isn't it really cool that we can do this? That's what this moment is about. And another one, the Miami City Ballet, I was at the Perez Art Museum. I was specifically thinking about that. And Franklin Sermons, whom you may know, Austin, because he used to be in Los Angeles as the curator of modern art at LACMA out there. But now he's complaining that he's doing too many of these things. He's got to get back to his regular. I think that's fantastic. The Miami City Ballet is doing the only Balanchine Nutcracker this December. Where are they doing it? Outdoors in Doral. By the way, not that far away from where President Trump has a golf course. And they're doing it hybrid. They're not yet doing it streaming. I wish they were, but it's Balanchine, and it couldn't be in a more different place than the classic stages. And it's going to work. And it's going to work because this is a moment of permission available for people who are able to think in a different way and to say, okay, bring it on. Let's try it. We can try things now. And that is a fantastic role for philanthropy, because I don't need to get paid back money. I need to get paid back in effort, in ideas, in impact in the society.
Mm. It's crisis gives permission, a theme
Yeah.
both of you hit on that. Like whether you're caring about social good or financial return, the theme there is, at this moment, how does your idea get bigger? How can your impact, your goal, get bigger? I lose you guys in a couple minutes, and we've gotten a bunch of audience Q&As here directly to me in chat. You guys can put it elsewhere in the chat, but I've gotten a bunch of these. One I wanted to touch on that I'm going to twist a bit and see how much this year has changed it. It's the inevitable how do you define impact question, but I'm wondering if you guys have had to have have you had to recalibrate that at all in 2020, or is impact? This is how we track it, and that remains steadfast.
I'm sorry, I really did a wrong thing. I started to look at the chat and I missed the question.
Oh no, sorry. Just has 2020
this is what
changed?
Happens, but remember, it's a moment of permission, so don't anybody give
well,
it.
It's the second screen experience. It's very challenging.
Okay.
No, it's how do you define impact, and have you had to recalibrate it in this year? And both of you, I'm sure, have quite, at end of 2019, I would think you would have been able to give me a very clear boilerplate answer. This is what our definition of impact is. Has that been shook by 2020, or do you have this is impact and nothing changes that?
No, I think for me the value of sheer innovation has increased, and and may still change, because if at some point X months from now the market, which has been, for all its volatility, has been remarkably sanguine in spite of the pandemic. If the market suddenly decides, holy cow, we've gone to hell in a handbasket, and drops radically, we will probably make a different set of choices that will include institutional support in a way that we're not necessarily doing now. Right now, we are far more than before, and we already were, but we're more than before looking for innovation, precisely because of our belief that this is really the tone of the moment.
And to clarify on that for you guys, impact would suddenly have more. You could define that by just new ideas. Hey, the ship's sinking a bit. We're a little more open to just like new ideas. Beyond what our more traditional views of impact would look like.
Yeah, we still want things to happen in community, but because it's a moment of permission, we're also saying maybe we're not going to be quite much of a stickler about the immediate impact, but just show me why you think you're going to increase audience. Show me why you're going to engage more people in whatever it is you're doing in open spaces. We've got a very robust program of reimagining public spaces. That's actually one of the most interesting conversations that we're supporting. People trying to figure out what are the uses of open spaces in a world of social distancing. It's a really very interesting kind of question.
Mm. Austin, you have a return on equity principle that to every LP you have to report on any fund. Are you? Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Is your answer like nothing changes? That is what impact is. I'm not trying to make my LPs nervous, or does 2020 make you think differently about what your definition of impact is?
No, everybody who's all of our investors, foundations, corporations, everybody knows what we stand for, and we're driven by economic inclusion. We've never positioned ourselves as an impact fund. We've always viewed it as. But with that being said, I think a lot of other people position us as an impact fund, and this is obviously what we're driven by. But we view that the inclusion as just a massive opportunity to create outperformance, and it's aligned with our values. So if that's impact, then fine, categorize it however we want to. But for us, it's been, I think, as the national conversation started discussing social justice issues much more openly and directly, a lot of what we were doing became much more relevant to a lot more people, and so we had a lot of interest in our fund. But the story hasn't changed. I mean, this is what me and my partner AJ Roland have been doing for the last decade plus.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's still even hard for me to categorize it as impact. It's like, this is just what I do. This is what I know. But ultimately we know that it's going to be impactful for the communities that we're aiming to serve.
I'm about to lose you both. I'm throwing our attendees. We're going to breakout groups as we've done all day to like recap what they just heard. I wonder if you guys would leave us with a last word on, when they go try to talk a bit now about what are their lessons of what VC and philanthropy can learn from each other. Is there one takeaway you would want to make sure that folks would get
Sure.
from your respective perspectives?
For me, it would be just kind of elaborating on that last point, in that, like, I don't necessarily believe that you have to have quote unquote concessionary returns to generate the change that you wish to see in the country. I think that if you're thoughtful about where there are pockets of opportunity, particularly where you can differentiate yourself, then I think that you could find ways to outperform, which is what we're out to do.
And I'd say think like a social investor and give yourself permission to risk.
Well said. Alberto, Austin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That was fun.
Both.
Thanks.
All right.
Great to see you, Austin. Bye.
All right.